Well, welcome everyone. Thanks so much for joining. We're going to crack into deep dive on business skills for farmers and growers. I'm going to dive into some, I guess, practical tools and learnings and mistakes and successes from years of doing different enterprises. And yeah, feel free to keep popping introductions in the chat. And if there's any questions and things, feel free to jump in. But there will also be time at the end. Yeah, as I said, my name's Hamish. I co-founded Middle Ground Growers about 8 years ago, and been farming, growing, and doing various other work and rivers work in the valley of Avon for well, all my life. Always lived here. Um, and I studied economics, which I never thought would come back round to be so useful for farming and growing at the time, but yeah, must have studied it for a reason, and it sort of loops back around to be really useful for um, yeah, how we kind of like design operations and food systems for I guess for viability as we shift towards those different and new and emergent food systems. It feels really important to build those models, um, albeit amidst the context of it being incredibly difficult to make that work. But we can certainly do um, all do things a little bit better and valuing our own time and things like that. So hopefully this is useful to share some of those tools. We're going to go through a whole range of things like basic terminology, basic like accounting stuff. We'll start with that. So apologies if that's a bit too basic, but I think it's useful to get on the same page. And profit and loss, and a bit on what I call financial backcasting, which is kind of rather than going from the scarcity mindset, how we actually set a vision, as tricky as it might seem in farming worlds, and how we then backcast back from that. Um, and a little bit then on sales strategy and marketing and how we actually prioritize, and looking at a few key tools, things like crop profitability, and how we actually assess that what we're doing is viable, and how we forecast if it's going to remain so, and if we can actually budget in for other things. But yeah, it'll just be an introduction to all those different tools, and really they all require having a go at them and practice. And none of them are rocket science, and they've all. I didn't actually learn any of these through an economics degree. That was much more other general stuff, and actually all of these have been learned from figuring it out and making mistakes as we go along with the farm business in today's difficult economy. But having said that, we've been able to still carve out livelihoods and a successful enough farm business model. So we'll jump in. Yeah, if you have any more questions or intros, keep putting them into the chat. Um, let's just see if I can. Cool. Okay. I'm assuming everyone can see the screen and shout if not. So I'm just going to start with this kind of basic overview of this is the kind of like synthesis of kind of all the lessons bundled together, I guess. And this is kind of the tick list that I'd really advise when looking at your growing business, farm business, or other types of enterprise as well. So the first one that's often missed is like determining your current financials and business model. So actually looking at what is the business model, especially with farms and CSAs and market gardens and things. We've often got a whole range of different business models in one. It's very complex, so there's a lot of uncertainty and misclarity and a lot of kind of cross subsidizing from one part of the business to the other. So it's really actually working out what the actual financial model is at the moment, or what is the business model. For example, is it a fully fledged business and self funding? Is it doing some volunteer days and doing like a whole charity, um, social ecological benefit branch to it, which many farms are, and running that as well as running a farm business, as well as running a social engagement thing, as well as running an educational program, as well, all these different things. So looking at actually, it's fine to have the complexity, but just looking at how that actually feeds into the business model and financials, which we'll dig into in a while. Number two, clarify the vision, and in collaboration with whoever the key stakeholders are on a small sole trader farm, that might be one or two people and a few kind of wider stakeholders, but it might be a kind of collaborative farm vision. Might also include regular users of the farm, regular enjoyers of the produce, and really setting that vision in collaboration of who every business serves to create some form of value, be that in all the different forms of capital, social, knowledge, cultural, economic. So we're looking at the whole broad range of that rather than just the financial in terms of the vision, but then backcast from how you actually make that happen, which I'll explain in a bit. And number three, which feels really important to me and is something that not many farms do, and it's something we took a while to do, but then it's made all the financials a lot clearer, is to really separate the essential food production as its kind of operation. And then number four, to kind of look at securing other income streams or funding for the things that are non-food production, because there's not enough margin in growing carrots to like fund a wetland, or there's not enough, you're not going to make enough profit on even salad and market garden crops to like fund a whole community engagement, volunteering, open days schemes. Like it will either rely on that will either rely on like unpaid time or someone just doing that out of passion, which is also doing it out of passion is amazing and not to be discouraged, but then the time needs to be valued. And if it's reliant on the farm income for that, it's going to be unsustained over time without the roles. Number five, financial tools at the macro level. So in economics, there's basically just like the bigger pattern level, the macro stuff, and then there's the micro, the day to day, the detail, and the kind of more like, you could call it household economics, or the more like what's that day to day budgeting and labor approach, and costings and budgets. So first, good economics on a farm business is kind of zooming in and out of both. So we call it like pattern to detail approach, which is a permaculture principle. And the macro level is involving like these key tools like cash flow, profit and loss, maybe using some softwares, and invoicing and sales, and looking at those macro level things, how we can kind of make those systems flow as well as possible. And then also zooming into the detail level, which is all about mindset, and it's about how the labor approach, the crop profitability, the on the ground more data, and the kind of clear budgets and clear roles within the farm business are managed as well. And all the time beneath all of that, like a good economically functioning farm will not just come from the head. It won't just come from like a good business plan or a financials thing. It'll come through like focusing and continually working on like relationships, workflows, patterns, weekly pattern, daily pattern, making it all clear, and communication amidst that, which is constant work. And I'm sure everyone with complex team farms will know that's the one of the most important pieces of work. And to balance that with all of the business of growing is one of the great challenges and opportunities. So as I said, if we just go from the head, like it won't be a good economics for farms. I think what I've learned over time through lots of mistakes and learning is through really this kind of head, heart, hands approach works best from lots of different farm situations I've worked at, advised for, supported with, helped co-design across dozens and dozens of farm examples. What it often comes down to is there'll be a lack in one of these things that will be causing some sort of loop of scarcity, or loop of like miscommunications, or loop of the financials not been organized, if there's like a head gap. So the key thing that I've seen time and time again is if the head, heart and hands are in balance, that's the key to that economic thriving. So a lot of people think of economics as just the head and just the financials and just the money, but regenerative and holistic economics requires all this, because economics isn't money. It's just economic money is one system that's used in modern times for economics, but economics is really about what we value, and how we kind of bring that to land, community, and ourselves. And there's lots of different tools and approaches for that. And farming, food growing, and enterprises are tools for that. And that creates the new economics if it's done with the head, heart, and hands. So the heart is like all about patterns, relational approach, clear governance, and roles. That is like crucial to like all the economic flows, the people feeling motivated, the marketing, the storytelling, the the efficiency on the ground, but efficiency coming from a place of flow and balance rather than just like hard driving efficiency. So that's why the heart is really crucial. When that efficiency comes from a different level of drive, it creates a very different flow and productivity from a very different sense. And the head is really crucial. And I'd say the head is often the really missing one, especially for like farm businesses, especially for yeah, a lot of very like passion driven projects and a lot of, or also just very like practical, amazingly practical people. Like the, you know, we often get into this work and into the farming and, you know, not really for to be absorbed in the head and in the financials and the cash flow and the business planning. But ironically, bringing those things in and having that on your in your skill set or in your team set um, with the head part, actually, ironically, that means you can flow more on the ground and kind of achieve your aims with actually less, maybe less head work and head space sometimes. So the design of it around the head, heart, and hands is really crucial. And the hands, of course, just making it happen day to day. So bringing the financials and all of that economic lens into the day to day approach. Because if we have all these business plans, which is the head, and we've got the heart, like we've got all the, you know, people systems designed really well and it's all thought about and there's all these sociocracy and there's all these other and there's so much design on it, but if the hands are making it happen and implementing those communication things and implementing those financials and actually implementing those budgets and then sticking to them is a totally different level, which I'm sure almost no business gets perfectly, but that's the optimized sort of direction, I guess. um, and ideally, to sort of bring together a balance of those different mindsets is part of that leadership journey, whether you're a market gardener or you're a employee working on a farm and you bring in those kind of mindsets, that's leadership in itself, or whether you're sort of managing a team, developing those mindsets at every opportunity is, I would say, that kind of good economics. And it's not about an, you know, necessarily individualistic thing. It's about also collaborating with others who have that in your team, and then you kind of go from this approach of meeting all our needs together. And I guess the root of this, the like the why we sort of want to focus on the good economics and the good financials. You know, it's not necessarily about profit, although profit is important to be able to reinvest and to be resilient. It's actually about all of the holistic economics of how we can shift from that kind of like, yeah, there's a lot of like sort of scarcity and freneticness in our sort of horticulture industry, partly because of the wider economic system, and also there's opportunities to shift kind of away from that through on the ground day to day financial planning and robust businesses. All easier said than done. So we'll dive into some of the practical tools. We've got 10 tools to go through. So it's going to be a whistle stop tour, and it's just going to be a kind of introduction to different ones, which I think I've kind of summarized as like the top tools I would sort of see as essential in farm businesses. So for lots of growing projects that I advise for and help with, and ones that I've helped to set up, these are the sort of ones that I've identified as most useful. And I think there's lots of farms with all the other tools in the world, and they've got all of the machinery and all the kit and all the market gardens tools and all the different seeder plates, but without the kind of financial tools or the design tools, it will often go astray. Even though all the practical things might be ticked off. So any quick questions? I can't actually see the chat whilst I'm on presenting mode. So if there is any urgent questions, then shout them out at this point before I jump into the different tools. Cool. All right. I'll take the silence to be everyone's making dinner, or there's no questions because it's all simple, clear, and everyone's going to be economically thriving. um, so first, tool number one is apologies if this is really basic, but just as a starting point, is to understand basic terms and track your costs. Tracking your true costs as well. So not just financial forecasts like, oh, we've got a budget for this and we think we spend about this on seed, but actually looking at what exactly did we spend last year on all those repairs and all those extra fuel expenses and all these other things. What did we actually spend, and what's the realistic cost, and what's the forecast for like next year when things shift a bit or we do a bit more deliveries or etc. So making really realistic forecasts and tracking the true costs is just one of the most fundamental um, things. Maybe put a little put a little hands up, do the little hands up symbol um, if you think your farm or business does all of that at the moment, like tracking true costs and knowing exactly what is spent on what every year. Um, Show of hands. Got a hand from Jess and a hand from Erin. That's great. Cool. Nice. I've got to say, we don't do it perfectly. I'm not pretending that we do. But we have, I'll go into a little bit of how we kind of categorize costs with the help of a bit of software and how we actually then try and budget based on the true costs rather than just financial projections. Because financial projections are always about whoever does them, if they're optimistic or pessimistic. And I tend to be quite optimistic. So I have to put on a completely different mindset and headspace. And I literally put on a different hat and just be like, yeah, become very like conservative and pessimistic about costings and looking at the true data and be like, okay, let's allow another extra 20% buffer for those costs and just have a totally different mindset to look at those costs to make sure it's resilient and all covered. So profit equals total revenue minus total costs. That's a nice, easy starting point. So all of your income, revenue from all the different sources, added all up together, and then all of your costs, all the overheads, including any new tools or kit or just general costs, overheads, direct costs, make up the total costs. And direct costs are anything like directly linked to the production. So this will be things like your seed, um, plants, compost, things that will like directly vary with the level of production. So if you're growing an extra acre of squash, then you'll have an extra proportionate amount of seed or an extra proportionate amount of compost for an extra 10 market garden beds of production. So direct costs are like directly variable with that output, basically. And overheads is kind of anything else and things that are more like necessary underlying costs for the business. So you've got a business, you're going to have utilities, rent, labor, um, whatever other things, Wi-Fi, water bill, all that sort of stuff. So they will obviously vary with the size of the business, but it's not like directly hinged on like the number of squash plants or something. So these are just like more general overheads. So that's your total cost. It's like overheads plus direct costs. Um, and really important to work out like costs per unit as well, rather than just generic overheads or generic direct costs, looking at what's the cost per unit for that like kilogram of squash or kilogram of potatoes output is really key to track. And we'll go into a little bit of tools on that. And maybe people can just put in the chat just to reinforce that, maybe put your highest direct cost, what you see as your highest direct cost at your farm or growing project at the moment, and what you think your highest overhead will be. If you just pop those in the chat, just guesses if you don't know, or it might be based on the actual numbers. It's always really good and interesting to see what people's are. I don't have the luxury of seeing the chat whilst I'm screen sharing, so I'll check those later. Oh, I do. I've worked it out. Yeah. So for overheads, people are putting wages. Yeah. So yeah, labour and wages would go into the overheads. So it'll be the top highest overheads. And direct costs, Delftland plants. Yeah. Nice. I remember when one of the first sort of one of my first jobs when I was like 13, I was working for a local deli, the Darling Deli, and lovely lady called Sarah who ran it, and I'd go down we'd go and pick up all the wholesale veg from the markets in town in the mornings that we'd use for the deli for the week. So we'd go and pick up all of the, crates and crates of cabbages, potatoes, and everything. And she'd basically give me like business coaching and stuff on the way down, and we'd have all these great discussions in the car, and she'd be like, like, right, okay, so today's lesson, Hamish. So what do you think our biggest overhead is in the business? And then I'd go through all these guesses. Oh, what is it? Is it the food because we're going to pick up the food shopping? I was like, no, no, it's labour. Always labour is the biggest overhead. So that was my first business lesson. Was when I was 13. My second business lesson, I won't diverge too many on these little stories. I was selling sweets at school. Had a great business. Age 14, doing buying wholesale sweets and then selling them, selling loads of sugar to all of my schoolmates. It was great. and and then one year I sort of had a couple of years later, I was making like 40 or 50 pound a day, which was quite good as a 14-year-old, just in sort of breaks at school and things like that. And then one day I had this sort of like health awakening, and I was like getting a bit chubby by age 16. I had all these sweet selling things, and I was like, oh, you know what, I'm gonna turn this around. I'm gonna start exercising loads. I'm gonna stop selling sweets. I'm gonna start selling Whole Foods. And started buying in Essentials Whole Foods to my house, and then bagging up the portions of nuts and bagging up the dates and things and bringing them into school instead. I was like, oh yeah, I really want, I want to be healthy myself, and I don't want to just give sweets to people. And then just went out of business overnight. Really, no one bought any health foods. So that was my second lesson in business. Was to do what the customers want to stay in business. No, not really. I actually didn't take on that lesson because I'm now just growing healthy vegetables for everyone and trying to make it work. um, so to go into from this tool number one, how we track our true costs and how we actually break that down in terms of all of the different operational costs, all of the different expenses, all the different overheads. That was really complex when we had much more manual accounting systems, and now it's, dare I say, it's simple once you're in the rhythm of it. So even for a small business, I'd advise this. Like we should have done it years before we did. Like just it doesn't necessarily have to be on Xero. There's other accounting softwares, but I sort of got used to Xero and I found it really useful. And it just means every cost that comes in, so it's linked to my bank account. So the Xero is linked to the bank account feed. So every single transaction that goes in and out of our farm account will be going through Xero, and I've just got to go in once a month and just sort of categorize those things, and Xero will like pick up on patterns and it will begin to automatically characterize stuff. So I don't need to do it for every transaction because we've sometimes got 100 a week or something to process. But it will group together all the veg box payments. It will group together all the wholesale payments. It will group together the market payments. So we've got our revenue really accurate on there. And then for all of the costs, we've got different categories. So if it's a cost for the flour sub enterprise, it can get labeled as that, so we know exactly how we keep track of sub enterprises. If it's a cost for electricity and water, it will categorize that, and I just label that at the end of the month if it's not done it automatically on Xero. If it's a fuel, I can do that. If it's insurance, etc. If it's marketing or staff training, it's all categorized. So by the end of the year, this sheet on the screen here is a very broad summary, but some of these also have subcategories. So you don't have to go into that much nerdy detail, but it's really useful to really look at and track the exact costs, where they're going, how it shifts each year, and then you can kind of accurately forecast. Because once you've got this data, say we're growing the business by 20%, and we think, okay, well, a few things will go up and shift, then we can financially forecast and say, okay, every month we've got an average of these administrative costs, these direct costs, these overheads, etc. We can add all that up, divide it by 12, and look at a monthly kind of averaged cash flow, like an average income flow and outflow. And then we can look at, okay, so we need to be making, for example, this year, like at least 3.5 grand from veg boxes every week, and at least 2,000 from wholesale every week, and at least 600 per market as well, to meet these income targets, which mean we generate X profit by the end of the year. And if we fall in below those targets, then we know something needs to shift, like whether it's labor changes, whether it's marketing for more customers, or looking at covering some like wider projects on the farm with a grant, like a wetland or something. So we can actually assess whether we're actually in the green or red. So that's why I've put this tool as number one, because this is like just yeah, basically evaluating our basic and true costs. So hopefully that's nice and clear. So it's an awful slide with lots of small text. But that's like one example, just like a snapshot from Xero for administrative costs, for example. Um, and tool number two, which feeds on from this mapping our true costs, is profit and loss, which I won't go into too much detail because people know, but just to make sure, building off that, getting an accurate picture of your true costs, then actually plugging that into the true profit and loss calculations. So total income will just be all of your different income streams. Direct costs total will be all of those things I say that will vary with the level of production. So your squash seeds, your plants, your compost, all those direct costs, and then all of your overheads, which yeah, for us the biggest is labor, and then there's lots of other ones, utilities, fuel, etc., etc. And then you get your profit amounts. And linking to that, so from that profit and loss, then it's a case of going into the detail. I guess kind of regardless of whether you're in the green or the red, it's looking at how do you actually get an accurate picture of what's going on. So again, you can do all this on Xero or on different softwares. You can just look at your sales revenue once you've actually categorized it all, which is actually less work than it sounds because it can do some things automatically. Or your accountant might do that manually as well, but can be very expensive. So, and it's good for you as a business owner and farmer to sometimes do that categorization because then you really get to know what your business costs truly are. So then it's looking at your main income sources and looking at the percentages, and then also trying to make sure that you're kind of putting the effort and energy and marketing and support and labor into what makes your income, to put it in a very kind of hard-nosed financial thing, and where the time goes basically in the labor. So it's really key to try and match up as much as possible, which actually we don't do that well because we've only just started getting more accurate information on all of this and recording hours spent where and things like that. But we try and design it at least as a whole with like our roles and what gets time on the farm and what we put time into. And of course you can design this to an extent because you might, especially if you've got the luxury of choosing your sales outlets, but that's often quite rare. So it's often looking at what's your actual sales strategy, which we'll touch on a bit later. So the second biggest thing to point out about in terms of profit and loss and your main costs is looking at like where the labor is split. So one example is to try and put that into like a chart to try and track that. So to do this properly, you'd have to sort of track your staff hours and log it, or like you might already have very clear roles within the business, so you know that like 3 days a week are on packing and 2 days are on field bed prep and growing and things like that. And it can be very complex with farms because there's just so many different tasks. Like we were trying to map it out as our team, and it was actually we're not there yet in terms of a really really accurate picture, but we know we've got clear roles and we know we've got clear days within the weekly pattern where we have these different percentages. So we started to just map out a kind of rough draft. And yeah, again, wishing we did that a bit sooner, because when you sort of look at how it links to income and profit and loss and how, yeah, where we spend time and things like that, it's really key. And it's not to say, oh, we just need only spend time on what brings in revenue, because you could say, oh, well, there's a holistic farm picture here, and actually doing the workshops and events brings so much community thing, and that brings in VegBox Custom, which brings in that big red chunk. So it's not, I know I'm simplifying here, but also there does need to be some matching up of these things, because otherwise you could actually be running a very profitable, you have to think of your farm as multiple lots of multiple sub enterprises because they are very complex often. So you might actually be running a really profitable, I don't know, market garden and veg box scheme, but you might have some aspects of it, your farm, that are actually kind of being loss leaders, maybe, which you can't really have a loss leader in a low margin enterprise. Like loss leaders are for like ones that make loads of profit. You can't really have like a loss leader like, oh, well, people like this item, and you can't really afford to because you're not making enough profit on the other items to justify that, is my opinion and what I've seen on farms. So the loss leaders, whether it comes to vegetables or whether it comes to aspects of a business, I'd say are good, really good to look at and evaluate and sort of shift to make sure you're not kind of draining resources from one part of the farm to another. And that leads on to kind of tool three, which is a little bit more holistic than that, the last kind of just sheer profit and loss. And this is about financial backcasting, which is a term I totally made up. Um, but it sort of it flips on its head the kind of financial forecasting, which I think is essential as well. And as I said, once you've got all the true costs and things like that, you can forecast your financials really accurately. Like I can usually tell what our bank balance will be in 6 months' time, which is a really handy tool for planning and for other things. If I know that literally, yeah, we're going to be really struggling in 6 months, like we can avert that before it happens, rather than be like, oh well, we suddenly have to have a redundancy or we have to have that. And yeah, you can't plan everything, but with the right information, you can plan those financial forecasts. So that's really key. But that's not all there is to it, because otherwise we'd just be forecasting and planning for risk, and we'd be having a very fear-based business, and that wouldn't really make much meaningful change in the world necessarily. It would just carry on risk and fear and business as usual. So financial backcasting is about actually how do we not only survive as a farm, but how do we sort of ideally move towards and create the conditions for thriving and for the vision we're all moving towards and motivated towards. So people's minds as one, because that's when you get the real flow and the on the ground efficiencies and just general more alignment and yeah, kind of working towards a collaborative vision is a very special thing. So you might at the pure kind of business level. Obviously, the collaborative vision will include probably loads of different things, loads of different aims. But say you just focusing on the labor and the business side of things. So you might have a collaborative vision of, and the collaborative vision, it should be both ambitious and sort of courageous and bold, but also realistic enough. So don't let the fear voice completely dominate, but don't let the blue sky idealistic one dominate as well. So again, having that balance of head, heart, and hands within your team or within your own mindset as a sort of leadership tool. So you might have, the vision of paying people £15 an hour, holiday pay, sick pay, year-round income resilience, more winter diversified income, X number of edge boxes. You might have a financial aim of it's good to aim for a good amount of profit. So aiming for like 15,000 or 30,000 profit. Because if you just aim to break even and then something goes wrong, or you don't have enough to reinvest in that broken tract, or you don't have enough to up the wages with inflation, or you don't have, all these things, like it's not good enough to just aim for the breaking even. You've got like set the financial aim to be profitable. And then you've got that kind of buffer to be financially resilient, reinvest in the business, improve in the operations, and then you put yourself on a positive upward spiral where you can then be like, oh, we can reinvest in that and we can buy that transplanter and our systems will be more efficient next year. So we're actually cutting the direct costs out and the overheads out next year. So it's a sort of more virtuous cycle. And then once you've got that collaborative vision, which might involve way more things than just what I've summarized on this slide, but you can then begin to backcast and look at what income targets each week or each month will be needed for that, what levels of budgets for X, Y, Z, like what budget for machinery improvement, what budget for pack space efficiency improvement, what budget for someone to support with marketing, and what will be those marketing targets, what level of investments needed here. And then you can backcast and look at the priorities of how to make it happen. And it sounds kind of maybe both complex and oversimplified as well, just to backcast from the vision. But I've seen it work in practice, and it's an incredibly powerful tool, and it creates a whole different energy and motivation and focus to the collaborative vision happening in reality in all of its nuances. So yeah, backcasting to sort of work backwards, basically. So once you've got these a backcasting example, you can put in your numbers. So bringing that vision into actual numbers is the key part that's often missed. So you might put in your labor requirements for the roles that you really need for the farm to feel balanced, and you put in for that, and then you put your budgets that you need for investment, and you put in your realistic overheads and direct costs that you'd need for that farm to feel balanced, and you put in a profit aim of 15,000, 30,000, whatever. Maybe it's 5 or 6% of your business, or something that will allow you to be financially resilient. And then you look at what income is required as like a recurring income. So what's your just like cash flow requirements for that month, for your weekly sales targets, etc., however you want to frame it. And then what might be the additional like investment needed to get you towards that vision. So it might be like, oh, actually, yeah, we've done this lovely backcasting, but then it turns out, we need to find 60 grand from Magic Money Tree, or we've got like a £12,000 gap where we can't cover the cost to reinvest in those things that will allow this to happen. And that's where other forms of finance come in: social investment, grants, just that, like how every business is required to operate, but we seem to be wary of them in the farming world, probably for good reason, but also maybe there's a softening in that, which will actually allow farms to thrive more. So looking at what's that gap basically between where we are and where we need to be, and what might be the additional income needed as a really sensible investment, which will allow us to make money on a more regular yearly basis going forward. So you can do this activity. There's a lot more. This is a kind of very simplified backcasting thing, but the principle is to specify the collaborative vision, bring that from the vision into numbers and to reality, and then backcast, and then look at the sort of monthly targets or what's actually needed, and then what might be the gap, and how is that gap going to be met through all sorts of different forms, whether it's membership scheme, marketing plan, different sales outlets, financials, social investment, funding, crowdfunding, etc., which we'll dip into later. And I guess this is just to serve as an example. Like, we sort of set this, I guess, collaborative vision. This is probably a year or so ago. So it was looking for, like, okay, we want each farm role. We structure our farm roles as the head, heart, and hands, and we sort of break up. People have lots of roles within their role, so it's realistically looking at, like, someone might coordinate the field crops, but they've also got another role in this business, and so it's looking at all those different head, heart, and hands roles that we all play. And our kind of collaborative vision was to have these roles fully covered for what we need for a collaborative farm, for what we need to feel comfortable, so we can scale, so we can do it with as much balance as possible. And we had a profit aim of 15 to 30,000. We had budget aims for things like cyclical spring water irrigation, which will reduce our overhead for water, which we're now just finishing. Solar power panels for the barn, which will reduce those energy costs. Marketing plan, comms plan, all these different things, sick pay, holiday pay, pensions and stuff, which we all have in place now. And from that collaborative vision, we just brought it back into, like, what's the monthly realistic income targets, and what's the level of, like, social investment needed, what's the level of maybe crowdfunding to make sure we've got the right cooling infrastructure and the right delivery system and things like that for it. So that's, in a whistle-stop tour, how we did that. And that's tool number 3, financial backcasting. So moving on to tool number 4 out of 10. Do a quick time check. 5:44. So sales strategy, and this completely links to that financial backcasting and how you actually make that vision into a reality. So sales strategy is something which obviously should be key, but it's often missed, I think, in a lot of farms. A lot of farms, when I might sort of ask why this route is their main sales out, why is that's their main sales strategy, like why veg boxes, and very, very rarely do I get like a sort of an economic answer, or like a sort of an economic strategy behind it. So it's I think we've often fell into the trap, and I myself have, of like, what's the, like, opportunistic market, or this has just come about because of this, so I'm going to go for that. And then you find yourself on a path where you're like doing lots of farmers markets and they're not actually profitable because of all the labor involved. And then but that's your main sales thing, and suddenly your business is set up for that, and then you can't get back in it. So there's no sales strategy. And it might be, for some people, the sales strategy might be markets. It might work really well. So this is very context dependent. So I can't tell you what's best or what's worst. But when I looked at it and looked at kind of our different sales outlets, It was looking at the different pros and cons of each ones, and for us, which one we get, which one we might get a good price, which one that is um, weighing that up with the level of effort, the level of labour costs, and then looking at which ones are actually viable based on actual numbers and actual data. So things like farmers markets came out as not particularly being viable. There's like one market that was viable, our main market that we did. The other one's less so, but we added in some factors for the number of VegBox customers we'd get from that market or different things to kind of quantify the other benefits. But we still came out as like, okay, actually, yeah, we need to like, we also came out, out of this kind of assessment I looked at was actually like, okay, VegBoxes is not necessarily the initial business model was for VegBoxes to be like 90% of the thing. And actually, from this analysis and looking at the actual numbers and the actual time and the actual statistics based on VegBoxes versus wholesale for our context, was that, oh, actually, yeah, wholesale can be more profitable in some cases for these things. So it was looking at, okay, how do we shift the business a bit? So we've got, now we're up to like 40% wholesale, which was kind of the target a couple of years ago. VegBoxes is like 50%. So it's still, I think 55, so it's still like the majority, and then markets is like 5%. So we shifted our business just over time without, dropping customers or without, suddenly having to find a million wholesale customers at once, just with a gradually organic process to shift that towards what's actually profitable. And big part of the sales strategy looking at is just like the simple equation of customer number times customer spend, and that so you can either increase your sales, you can either increase your customer number or you can increase your spend per customer. And they've each got different benefits. So we decided to try and focus on existing wholesale customers, try and get more spend per customer, rather than spreading ourselves too thin across loads. Like there's like 20 wholesale customers, but we could have spread that to more like 25 or 30, but actually that would have been way less economic. So we're trying to increase spend per customer. Same for the VegBoxes. We decided not to grow it loads in number, although we were still obviously always seeking and open to those more. But our marketing was targeted more at like extras and increased spend per customer, getting people eating more veg through more communications and more recipes, and more meeting them where they're at with cleaner veg and just things that mean people stay and they don't go back to the supermarkets. Year-round produce, being able to pause all these. So we tried to increase the retention rate rather than just increasing numbers blindly. So there's different ways to increase sales. It's not always more people. That's tool 4. Hopefully that's useful. Maybe in the chat if you want to put in your kind of what's your main sales outlet at the moment, that'd be useful just to see what people's main one is and if they think it's the most profitable route. And also I fully appreciate most people it will often be limited by maybe what is the perceived possible market, because we might just have wholesale as an option if we're very potentially very rural, or if we don't have the access to the high level direct sales or things like that. So this is why this table is just context specific, so it might be very different for your context. Any questions at that point? Anyone want to jump in? Again, I can't see the chat at the moment, so just feel free to jump in.
Can I just ask Hamish about the solar panels that you guys got? Did you apply for a grant or something to get those, or was that part of the crowdfunder? Or
Yes,
yeah.
so solar panels, there was a grant, and then I think we match funded a bit as a business because it was a worthwhile investment. So I think out of that backcasting, we kind of got to the point of like, okay, yeah, we can't, although we want to do all this is our collaborative vision, then it's bringing it back to reality of like, what's the gap missing basically, and then what could be funded elsewhere. And yeah, I guess even if the fund wasn't available, we probably still like we're in that phase at the moment. There's less funding for solar at the moment,
Mm.
but we're still considering investing in that, or even getting a loan too, because it's kind of no brainer. Like we could get if we cover the roof and solar on the barn, it's £1,000 a month income versus it being not very nice roof.
Mm.
And although that will cost 50 grand to invest in, it's like, yeah, if we got trust in our business and trust in ourselves and things like that, then borrowing that money to do that through a trusted, social investment body or someone like Leap or something like that, does make sense. So it's like ideally we can go out and fund it, or maybe we'll wait for the opportunity for that to be, but I'd still consider it for that. And I know there's lots of wariness around loans and things, but it's finding the right time of the business
Mm.
to do that, I guess, to make those choices and to sort of, I guess, be bold but also realistic with them, and do the numbers accurately. Because in theory, you could say like anything could improve efficiency. So we've often fell into the trap of like we'll just keep buying more like different tools or like things that will technically improve, or like another irrigation system that will technically improve efficiency. And it's like great, it technically will, but that's the theory, and we actually need it to actually do that. So a lot of farms I often hear like, oh well, we should just do this because it will save loads of labor, but then their labor budget is still this. They've still got the same roles. Their labor budget's still the same next week, or they haven't saved anything on labor. They've just spent an extra bit of money on something. So unless it's actually going to make a difference on that balance sheet, then it's not a cost saving thing. So things like the solar, it's quite obvious because it's like the utilities will just go down. Other
Mm.
things were a bit more like might have to weigh up a bit more. Yeah,
Mm. Thank you.
cool. All right, tool number five. Um, Prioritization. So I say, yeah, this is like one of the most key things on farms, especially with our kind of maybe a lot of um, people here are also like with more like complex farms, more like community oriented farms. Also, as I said, like you have to really see your farm as like it's got lots of different businesses within it. Like it's not a simple business as my sweet selling business was just buy the sweets, sell the sweets. That's it. That was my simple business at school. But this is, yeah, farm business is very different. There's like so many different things, um, so many different priorities, so many different roles. And that's why I'm so like amazed and impressed by all the different growers because they're kind of wearing like 50 hats at one time. But I think it's finding the functional diversity for that and trying to prioritize, is the really key bit and the bit where we often go wrong. So there's a couple of like simple things that I use for that. One is just like when we're looking at the more macro picture and the pattern. So if we're looking at like financial or business plans or visions for the year as a team, rather than like there's a million things we could do and there's a million improvements we could always make on the farm and we could always be more perfect, or you could optimize this system and da 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 da. But yeah, keeping those goals realistic and how do we like prioritize things? So like the 3-3-3 planning method, or like call it whatever you want, or use any other number. But this has always really worked for me when, especially when I'm like overwhelmed at the number of opportunities or the number of like possibilities for refinement, or there's like people can get stuck in that perfectionist thing, myself included, and it's just to really narrow it down and be like, okay, realistically, everyone's busy. It's always stretched in the season. What are like three business goals we can focus on this year? What are three improvements to the production system? Maybe it's like cooler space expansion and improvement, pack area redesign and extra scales and stuff, and one sales marketing outreach thing. So looking at just like really chunk it down and break it down, and if like you could write out a big long list of 10 for each one, but then you could just gradually cross off until you have three left and just go through that, like just do really simple tools to like bring that overwhelm into like focus. Just go from that big long list and scribbles and then just like cross 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 cross. um, or sometimes I do numbers, so priority rankings is the second one. So sometimes I'll do like all of the tasks and stuff that I think realistically needed to be looked at in the next, say, 3 months. I usually do it in like a 3 month cycle on the farm. Put that all up on a whiteboard, and then I'll just add a score of like 1 to 5. So if it's like priority one, then I'll give it a number one ranking. So it might be like things that really can't be avoided. Like the sow-ins or the propagation or fixed irrigation or do those things. They'll obviously get a one, and then it's the more discernment space, as if things are like on the borderline of like 3 or 4 or 5, then yeah, obviously prioritizing them less, which just sounds very obvious when I say it, but actually when you've got all these task lists, then it can just seem like, oh my God, there's like 40 things on that list. And actually it's like, oh no, there's like three number one things that I just need to do today. And then like I'll do those number two things later in the week, and we'll just do what we can. So daily prioritization. But you could also look at that from a business perspective. If you've got like all these aims for the year or for the next 5 years or for the startup of a garden or for a new farm business, then you could also look at this kind of prioritization tool from a wider business perspective. So zooming out and zooming in, doing the pattern and the detail economics, I find is really key. So I use this at all the different tools, I guess. Um, so viewing economics from the holistic lens and making sure you're looking at like the pattern level, the macroeconomics, which might be a sort of business costs, revenue, cash flow, profit and loss, labor percentages, and then getting in the practice of not just doing that bit, because some people are very good at that overview, the sort of spider's web, but not people like good at zooming in onto the detail, and also vice versa. Some people get incredibly into the detail, and it can be easy to get lost in the detail um, of like this size of this bed and how how this one bed is made perfectly, whilst the rest of the farm is like burning or something. And it's just like zoom in on this one bed. My learning from that of I can get lost in both at times. So trying to cultivate a balance between the two and to practice that zooming in and zooming out, I find is really useful to develop the economic mindset kind of on the farm and on the ground. So detail level might be like looking in at that, honing in on that like profitability of that single market garden bed, or honing in on the profitability of that sub enterprise of herbs, or honing in on like this particular crop, like are potatoes profitable, or for my system, for my context, and then like continually asking, does this make economic sense? So that can be just on the day to day of like, okay, I've got to go to the far end of the field and like hand dig 10 kg of Jerusalem artichokes, and they sell at whatever £3 or £4 a kilo, and the labor cost is only like a third of the total cost. So I've got to to actually make money from that 10 kg of Jerusalem artichokes. You might say, oh well, that's 30 quid from that box of Jerusalem artichokes. If I go and dig that up and pick, I mean, you don't have to do this every example, but like as an example, those Jerusalem artichokes, you might say, oh, we're getting 30 quid income. So it's well worth me going up and spending half an hour walking up there, digging them up, bringing them back, washing them, packing them. Because my labor is only, £9 for half an hour. But then actually, your labor's only, for our business, it's like a third of the overall, once we've incorporated in like a budget, an amount for profit and amount for all these other costs, like labor is actually a third of it. So I've got to times that labor by 3. So I'm timesing that half an hour by 3 to reflect the true cost, and then all of a sudden I'm only just breaking even on that. So it seems profitable, but actually it's not in reality. So there's some things that would be very threshold of that, and some things that are really obvious, like okay, yeah, I'm harvesting 10 crates of garlic, and that's selling for this. So that does make economic sense. It's obvious, but there's the more borderline ones that we need to like hone in and look at on the day to day. So yeah, pattern to detail. That's it for tool 6 really. And that links to tool 7. So this is going into the detail level. So maybe you can each pick a crop and post it in the group, and maybe pick like a borderline crop, like a crop that you think will, yeah, you're not sure whether it's like profitable in your system. And if you pick that crop, post it in the group, and then we'll do a little activity. So this one's all about like the detail level. So going from that pattern lens and the macroeconomics into the micro level of like, how do we make decisions about whether, given that we're in a stretched financial situation and economic context, and we're not really profitable enough to be growing loss leaders, is my take on it. So how can we actually determine whether a crop is kind of draining the rest of the business or whether it's generating enough for it? And you might want to say that, oh, actually, it brings a lot of value because people like this thing, and then you can try and put a value on that and add that into the equation. I wouldn't do that myself, but I know people are attached to certain crops, so they might want to do that. So yeah, pick a crop of your choice. post it in the group, and then just do like a very simple application. So to calculate crop profitability, this is just something I've developed. So Evan's doing sprouts, Jessica's doing raspberries. Great. There's many different metrics that builds into that profitability, but I kind of developed this tool over time and it's sort of shifted over the years. But my kind of four key factors are like value, which is just the price per kilogram, and the quantity in kilograms per acre across the year, or you might want to choose kilograms per meter squared, or however you want to frame it. And then the labor efficiency and the input efficiency. There are like lots of other factors, but a lot of them I can kind of summarize into a labor efficiency or an input efficiency. So that's kind of how I'll try and like give a score to each crop. I don't actually do it for every crop every year. I'm not that nerdy, but I have done it for most of our crops at some point in the last 3 years. Carrots, that's a good one to do. Potatoes. I knew Fred would go for potatoes. um, so if you just give it put some numbers to it. So using these four variables, um, just give each one a rating. So if let's take like we could do carrots as an example. So value, price per kilogram, we could say £2. Yield kilograms per acre across the year. I don't know, someone that might know field scale amounts more than me, but a few tons. And label, so just give those. It's actually not doesn't necessarily need the numbers, but it's more like the values. So yeah, so looking at value, like if it's a really high value crop, if it's like one of your most pounds per kilogram, then give it a high score, give it a 5. So if it's a really low value per kilo, give it like a 1 or a 2. So carrots, I might give a 2 or something like that. For our context, at least, it might be better for others. Yield quantity across the year, which can include like multi-cropping in market gardens and things like that. I'd say like yield quantity, I might give it like a 3 for our context. Labor efficiency, carrots can be quite intensive to weed. It depends on your process. We don't have a roots harvester, so they're quite labor intensive to harvest. So for our context, the labor efficiency is quite low. So I give it like a 2 or a 3. But for other contexts that might have other things, it might be quite efficient to do carrots. Input efficiency, I say carrots are fairly low input in a way because we can just direct seed them. They don't necessarily require, huge volumes of fertility or anything. It's just a root crop. So input efficiency is like got quite a good score. So might have a 4. So as in efficient, it's efficient, so it gets a high score. So I'm going to put a 4 for that. So I'd add up those scores. I got 4 plus 2 plus 2 plus 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. So it's got a score of 10. And then I can cross-reference that with like scores that other vegetables have got if I use a similar metric for our context. And I can say, okay, carrots have got a 10, cabbages got 11, radishes got 14, squash got 15, kale got 19, and I can just add all up these different ones and look at all of that on a spreadsheet, um, which might look a bit like this. This is when I used slightly different variables, but quite similar. And once we've got that we can have like kind of operational like profitability crop index basically. And as we've seen from my example, it is quite subjective and it is quite dependent on the context because for some people things will be they might be selling their potatoes really high because they're fresh new potatoes and they might be having a really labor efficient process for those spuds or for those carrots. So you've got to do this. I can't give you numbers for each crop. You'll have to kind of do it for yourself. Although I do have numbers for all of our contexts. So does anyone does that make sense? And does anyone want to share a score? Nice. People have added some in. Cool. Nice. So Fred's got 12, 15 for carrots. Erin's got 9 for sprouts. Sophie's got 9, 13 for carrots. So I reckon doing some fresh bunches. Yeah. So nice. So that's like those numbers are really good to have. And when you start to compare it with other crops, then it becomes to really be a useful tool, basically. And I mean, I used to nerd out much more on this and like look at actually like I used to actually give it the numbers of like the labor per bed and the actual what it would actually take. So like you can put an actual number to like labor efficiency. It's quite tricky and quite complex, and there's probably still lots of variables, but you can put money to that, a number to that. You can put that for input efficiency. This is kind of what people do when they're growing just an arable crop of wheat because they got one crop to think about. They can actually look at the actual numbers. So I think that's where we sort of lose out as growing more diverse crops. But I think we can bring some of that in at least with good estimations. And if you want to, you can nerd out more on it and get some really good information. Because I'd say, if the profit margins are really small for your farm or growing business, but you're growing 50 varieties of crops, you could still have a really good functional diversity of crops and still have a really functioning, thriving agroecological farm with loads of diversity, really good for the soil, but be actually profitable if you like get rid of a few lost leaders. Is my challenge and invitation to you, because some crops are just a lot more labor intensive. And yes, any thoughts or questions on that? And I think this is also where like collaboration as a region comes in really handy, because I think people will have really different scores for each of these things. So for us, some things were really economic, which won't be for other people. And yeah, vice versa for other things. So we can actually do this thing called trading and support each other and having a more resilient, collaborative regional supply where we do kind of all our farms are more viable, but we're actually combining those crops sensibly based on people's like equipment, tools, knowledge, soil types, all these different things. Rather than getting a really clay farm without access to machinery to have to grow loads of root crops, which would make no sense. We want the nice loamy farms to do that without, taking it too far and going into full specialization. I think we can find a better balance to make sure we're a bit more in the green every week and we can actually look after our people and incomes and resilience, is my opinion on it anyway. Tool number 8. Are you ready? This is lots of economics for a Wednesday evening. I hope you guys are doing all right, or you might be just enjoying your dinner or having a book. But I hope it's useful. I'm giving like lots of summaries and simplified versions of like tools that have been developed over years. So there's lots more to dive into for each one, but hopefully it gives a little window. So tool number 8 is income flow. So this is like looking back to the pattern level. So as I said, we're kind of just zooming in and out, which is the key financial thing of like go into that detail, but don't get lost in it. Look at that pattern, look at the macroeconomics. So looking at income flow, this is what I mentioned a little bit earlier when I was talking about once we have the accurate true costs defined, then we can look at across the year, are we actually going to be in the green or the red every week? Because as basic as it sounds, if you're in the red every week by like £5, it might not seem like much, but that adds up to quite a lot through the year for a small business. And that's the difference between like going bust in a few years or having no money to reinvest or not pay people properly or do all this thing versus being in the green and actually being able to really look after everything, farm business better, reinvest in circular systems, do become a regenerative business or become in that direction at least. So that tiny little difference of the cost of, it's just the cost of a pint, that little £5 a week there or there with a bit more planning. Suddenly you're in the green, £5 a week every week, and then suddenly that adds up to loads more. And you can have 1,000-acre farm producing tons and tons of vegetables or something. But if they're in the red by a couple of pounds each week, then they're like less profitable than an acre doing something really well and planning the financials and the profitability. You might say, oh, all this work, 1,000 acres, all this, and then like the actual profitability is, yeah, it might be completely different. It might be the difference of £3,000 in the green versus 3,000 in the red. So to work out the average income flow, I'd say this is the potentially the most important tool because this enables us to like financially forecast and work out if we're actually that profit and loss is actually going to be rather than just a gamble. Like, oh, we'll just see what comes at the end of the year. Is it going to be profitable or not? Are we going to break even again? Are we going to lose a bit again? There is ways to at least help plan for that basically and to help sort of know and to then readjust your course if you need to and realistically know and plan ahead for those labor things for that financial planning and all of that. It can take a lot of stress out and it can take a lot of things like that. And it's not about controlling it because we know about growing and organics. There will be lots of variables. There will be lots of things that go wrong, but you can allow buffer budgets for that and do all of this. So it's about it's just about setting the groundworks to look after your future self and look after your farm resilience. So the first step is to work out our average weekly outgoing costs and revenue. So if we take a weekly example, I think a weekly is really good to look at because it's tangible. It's like, okay, what have we made this week and what have we spent this week? So looking at those average weekly outgoing costs, we can do that because we have those numbers from tool number 1 and tool number 2. So we've got our true costs, we've worked out realistic forecasts, and we know what our weekly costs really are. And then we can look at our weekly revenue, which again we can use from actual real life data, or we can forecast revenue if we're really confident we'll get X number of customers by this. But I'd say caution to that, be very conservative enough with those estimates. And then look at that basically and see, like, okay, are we in the green or the red? And do we need to make adjustments? Do we need to either cut some costs or increase income targets through some investment in that for some marketing or lots of other tools, which we'll go into. So an example I'll quickly run through, and feel free to post your own examples because I think that's the best way to learn, or like jot them down in your notebook, or if you're happy to share, I think it's really useful for people to see like a tangible example in the chat, even if it's just really simple. So this is very like summarized info. So like our weekly income, that should say 3,000 from veg boxes and 1,500 from wholesale. So I think this is based on actual numbers from last year. Each week we employed 25 days of labour at £100 a day, so 2,500 cost, plus all of our weekly costs. So that thing from tool 1 where we like looked at the realistic costs and then we spread that through the whole year, and that was £1,400 every week, including a little buffer budget because it's always good to include that buffer for things that go wrong. I usually add about 10% for that. So all of that 1,400 plus our biggest overhead labour, 2,500. So our total outflow, the total money going out every week through this model was 3,900. So because of our weekly income targets were higher than that, and that was what we could realistically meet, the average inflow was £600. So I did this whole exercise again for this year, and actually looked at it. A lot of our weekly costs have gone up a lot, as is often the way. And then looking at the realistic costs from last year, we like invested lots in different machinery. We invested lots in other stuff. We had lots of like increase in insurance costs. The fuel costs were huge. We were doing more deliveries, so I had to reassess this whole model. And then actually the weekly average costs had gone up to like 1,700. So this isn't something you do once. You have to like come back to it again and again. And then our weekly income wasn't like massively different. We had like a slight more wholesale, but slightly less veg boxes. So it was kind of like pretty steady. So actually it left when I analysed it properly and realistically, I was like, oh shit, we've got an average weekly income of like minus every week. So it's actually in the red every week. But I'd sort of noticed that before it became a huge income drain, because if I noticed it 6 months later, we'd already be below our reserves level, so we'd already be like a bit buggered. So we're now in the course because we've had our costs change, because we've kind of not really met our marketing targets, we've kind of just like plateaued a bit. We haven't really put as much time and energy into it as we did in the early years. So now it's kind of we're readjusting that to get the weekly income targets up, and we have already done that a bit. The wholesale's gone out. We've just done a bit more impetus to it and things like that, rather than just sort of thinking, oh, it'll just we can't encourage it. It's just that it will happen what will happen, and just so we're actually much more intentional comms and things like that to get more weekly sales, which actually makes a huge difference. And we've got a few more VegBox customers. We've increased the spend per customer through a few different add-ons and a few communications, and so we had a whole strategy to basically make up this deficit, from move it from minus every week to positive every week. And then after 6 months, then well, we're in the midst of it now, but looking likely we'll be able to then go back into the green with it. So obviously farming is very seasonal, so we look at this as averages. Some people look at it as like more pure cash flow, like actual what's this month, but that's just so complex with the variability. So I think we need to look at like what's our income target across the board, and we actually do try and keep a steady income through the seasons, through like buying in for veg boxes in the winter, and we need year-round labor roles. So that was one of our aims, was for year-round resilience, basically. So that's like, yeah, one example of income flow and like using that tool. It's not too complex once you get in the habit of it, and this is from like a spreadsheet formula that I can just literally plug in a few numbers, plug in our labor. Our labor went up hugely. We upped the wages. We did full holiday pay, added all the stuff in. We got maternity pay, paternity pay this year, so that's an extra £9,000, and all these extra things. So we've actually added in all those realistic costs, all of the stuff, and then we're then setting the income targets and what we need based on that, if that makes sense. Hopefully that's all clear enough. Do say if not. I think when I've done these sessions, I've usually rushed over this section because it seems basic, but actually it's quite fundamental and also can be quite complex. And yes, to Poppy, this recording and slides will be made available, and I'm glad that it's useful. I do sometimes, especially on online things, I do sometimes just because I'm just speaking to a screen. It's always very strange. so thanks for that. It's good to know. But putting it out in the trust that it's useful and helps overall farm resilience for everyone. Tool number 9. So a lot of you might be asking, like, oh, this is very simplistic in terms of just set your income flow and then make your income targets and then make more money and then you're in the green. Lovely. But of course, that requires a few other tools and financial mindsets on the day to day, and ability to have clear budgeting and marketing. So obviously, when you're looking at going back to this example, if you've written this and you come out in the red, then there's a whole suite of different tools and strategies. You don't need to like panic and be like, oh, we're going to lose money by the end of the year. It's like there's a whole suite of tools. It's like, oh, it's great, you've clocked that before it's happened, and now there's a whole suite of tools and approaches and things you can do to kind of plan that and to shift it and to shift that oil tanker direction a little bit in a different way. Which might take a bit of time because it might need business changes, or it might need looking at your overheads, or it might need marketing strategy, or it might need fundraising for something that's costing you a lot, and you can shift your business model with it. Or it might be slashing a few unprofitable crops until you're in a financial resilient position to actually reintroduce or find other things. So this is why relational marketing is really important. I don't think it's like the word marketing. Everyone has a phobia of the word marketing, especially growers and farmers. Even though as growers and farmers, we are the primary marketers. We literally like invented markets as farmers, and we invented farmers kind of created that more human trade in a sense, and bringing and sharing surpluses and making sure it's reciprocal. So marketing is all about relationships, as any on the ground market or online market or others. It's all about trust building basically, and communications, and inspiring people along with the sort of the what, the why, and the how of both your story and the farm story and the wider context that sits within. And it'll be very different depending on different contexts and different audiences. So there's no single size fits all, but there's a few really useful principles. And it doesn't necessarily need to be really complicated or really techy, although that tech support can help because now most marketing is online. But it doesn't need to be all like doesn't need to be this unreachable thing. People have this idea of marketing. It's like, oh, that's not me. I can't do that. And oh, this is like on that. And ideally, I actually agree. I think like the pressure to do marketing and stuff should be taken off farmers and growers, and we should have, a regional support system for that. And we can actually just grow food and things like that. But telling our story is also a really powerful way to engage community with the land and to educate and to build relationships and for that social aspect and all of those things. So yeah, focus on the who, the how, and the why. Who grew it, and tell your story and tell the farmer and the grower story, and really lift up that, even if it's a bit out of the comfort zone, to kind of put your face on it and things. But at the end of the day, you have grown it, and should be proud of that. And how it was grown, like even if it seems obvious to you that you're doing it in a totally radical, amazing, transformative, sustainable way, or it's really niche but on your landscape and XYZ reasons, and just go into all that detail and share that. People are really interested, especially recently. I think there's a real interest in like food, how it's grown, where it's come from, and why it's special. What's your this is called unique unique selling points in marketing lingo, but it's really just why it's bringing value to your community. You've got a farm and a business because it brings value to the world, and it brings value to community and to the land. So why tell that story and why it's special, and then build the relationships for that as well. And also like get the help with it if you've come to this point and you really need to flip the business around to make it go from green to red. Like, can you get some like a lot of this is really good if it comes from you and the farm and the grower on one level, because that's the authentic voice telling the story, and that's coming from the ground, literally from the soil. But can you get some help to help tell that story, and like someone to do some professional, just once you got some really good high res photos and videography and things like that, someone that can help with that. Maybe there's like a research student, or there's various agencies like the Nest, which offer sliding scale supports for like farms and CSAs and things, and lots of other bodies that will help with that, and local people that have got skills and businesses, but they want to put it towards something good. So get the help if you need. And onto another tool. I think it's a tool 10 actually. Tool 9. The magic money tree. We're finally there. Any questions on the last few tools? So we've got, just to recap, we've done pattern to detail, prioritization, crop profitability index, income flow, which is really key, and maybe this should go as like tool 1 or tool 2 probably, and relational marketing. And then we're going to look a bit at fundraising in a moment. But are there any questions? Got our farm wetlands in my background, by the way. Brought them down with me on Zoom, where I had a nice swim earlier. It was very nice. Cool. It's just getting dark here. The sun is setting on the river. I'm calling for my boat, and I always, because it's solar powered and it's all like soft lighting, I always get to this point of the webinars, and then the room gets like quite dark, and I need to switch on the inverter. But so tool number 9. So we're nearly there, and then we'll have a bit of time for questions. We've got a few more tools to finish up on. So the magic money tree. I'm not promising any magic money tree. I just put this up as a joke that we're kind of always, as farmers and growers, we want to be, understandably enough, just focusing on the farming and growing, heads down, hoeing the ground, harvesting the crops, and that's all really important. And I do think we should be freed up to just do that and have, a regional hub just that can help with the marketing, or, we've got, as a community, we can, market and tell the stories of the farms together. But I think that focus and that our will to just do the farming and growing means we're not like looking up at all the opportunities. And when we as a farm started to look up at those opportunities more, we realized actually there was kind of like, because we're doing so much social, environmental, ecological benefit, there was actually just, kind of countless opportunities to actually make sure we're getting rewarded for that, and to make sure we are covering all the food growing costs and stuff just through our business, through our veg boxes. But all of the broader stuff, like all the wider work we're doing, the community engagement, the wetlands, the biodiversity work, the hedgerow management, all these different things to make sure that's actually paid for, and that we're harvesting the money from the magic money tree to actually pay for those things which cost us money, and we can't afford to pay for all of that with the sale of radishes as much as we love them, in my opinion. So that's why this tool comes in handy. This is maybe for more like holistic farms and community farms, but also I'd say most, or everyone on this call, and probably many people listening to the recording, will be in a situation where their farm is providing like multiple goods for society. It's providing lots of value beyond just food production, and yet we're in a kind of market failure thing where we're only provided income for that food, and that's at a very low cost, which hasn't gone up with other costs. So it's in a very failed, you could call it a failed market if you're just looking at in that. And we're picking up the costs of that, all of the costs as growers, by overworking, by not funding our true costs, by not having the financial abundance to be able to keep creating and innovating and doing all the stuff that we need to do. Although, to be honest, everyone still finds a way to do it, which is amazing, but it could be much more resourced. So tool number 9 is really key for basically all of those things that are beyond just the food operations, looking at how we can actually fund those and resource them, and how this could be a tool to actually resource farmers to do all of the wider stuff. So the approach that we take with this is we're not reliant on fundraising. We don't want to be reliant on grants or government or things like that. And many farmers feel the same. We're this sort of stubborn breed of people that don't want to be like reliant on those things, or we see them as handouts. But we want to take and harvest from the things we're already like doing, and things that are part of our vision, which we should be paid for and resourced for. So we separate out our business. We have all of the food operations, the veg boxes, the growing, the market garden, the fields, the tunnel. All of that is all within its own kind of viable and just about profitable enterprise, which is Middle Ground Growers. And that's all basically running through that direct community support, having the veg box customers, wholesale customers, which pays for the food production, the growing, the seeds, the plants, the overheads, the labour, all of that sort of stuff, the deliveries. And then the second part that we've separated out is like looking at all the other things we do. So we offer community open days, farm tours, education. We offer inspiration, cultural capital, knowledge exchange, biodiversity habitats, hedgerows, wetlands, carbon sequestration, all of these different things. We then look at all of that pot and be like, if we were to be funded for all of that work, we'd probably be making absolute millions. But even if we can just get a fraction of that funded through these various schemes, which actually there are more and more of. So, going back to that image of that tree, we're all looking down, but there is actually more and more of these things cropping up every month. And, we need to look up or get help or support to access them, basically, to resource ourselves. So yeah, we need to look at those different alternative funding mechanisms for all of that other side of the farm stuff, in my opinion, because otherwise it's just not going to be viable to kind of subsidize all of the other side of the farm through food growing, which hasn't got too much margins. So a few examples about up here, like community funding, crowdfunding, community shares schemes, where people can buy in with withdrawable shares, but they'll just want to put money into a farm rather than a bank account, and allow that to help your investment and things like that. Some really good models. There's loads of community-owned farms now, but also there's like community-run businesses, crowd-funded farms, so you can get the startup costs really done well. So that's a really good route to look at, because that's kind of, you'll all often have a community of support already. So it's actually just a lot of people want to help anyway. And actually a lot of people don't necessarily want weekly veg, but they would want to donate to a crowdfunder, is the relative where we're at. And people want to help, so take the help and use it for social and ecological benefit. DEFRA grants, of course, and there's lots of resources and help and things on those. That's a whole other webinar. But the SFI, the rural payments, countryside stewardship, everything like that. I think we probably get about 12. Yeah, it's about 12 grand a year this year for our various like SFI plus organic land plus all the other stacked options through the SFI and DEFRA schemes. So that's quite good. That's like nearly a grand per acre, which wasn't the case, 5 years ago on BPS or other things. So it's good that that's, even though it's very imperfect and it's now begun to exclude smaller farms again and it's sort of going back, it's still a route to consider if you're of that, if you match those criteria. Farming in protected landscapes. So if you're in a national landscape, FIPL areas, area of outstanding natural beauties, then there's these really flexible funds which are all about like people, place, and nature, and you can access really quite, up to 100 grand or maybe even 200 grand for like a whole variety of projects. It could be like volunteer engagement, it could be wetlands, it could be fencing help or hedgerow help or orchard or agroforestry or innovation or all the sorts of things. So that's a really flexible one if you're in a protected landscape. If you're not in a protected landscape, there's also things like regional grants, local councils, combined authorities, dozens of trusts and foundations. There's all these fundraising search tools. To be honest, if you're short on time, type it into some AI bot, one of the less extractive ones ideally, and type in your information from your farm and ask it to match you with the right grants that are out there on the website, because otherwise it's just days and days of work trawling through it. And I think that's an appropriate use of technology. But again, just my opinion. Social investment is really worth considering, especially if you're like at that point of, okay, yeah, the business is in the red every month, but we've actually got potential to have a really solid business and at least cover those core costs and be viable, but we've just got like this inefficient process, or we've not got the right machine for this, or we're like paying for community engagement where we could actually fund that through something else, or all these different things. So that's, I think, where like social investment can be really good if you actually got like a business case for like, okay, we just need a fridge van, or we just need a cooler infrastructure, or a proper harvesting setup or wash station or something. Then that's when like the social investment or like blended finance or like combined grants and loans can be really useful. So I've already mentioned LEAP. They're a really good one specific to agriculture. And there's also lots more like broader food systemsy ones. And all the generic grants, which people probably know about, like lottery, there's Grant Finder, community grants, Royal Countryside Fund, Farming the Future, and dozens of others on the Magic Money Tree. And crowdfunding. I don't think this video is embedded. Let's see. But anyway, we've got a crowdfunding video online if you want to see an example of, yeah, the kind of like the narrative and the sort of balance of like vision with pragmatism that is, well, in that case was successful. We raised nearly £100,000 to start up the farm. We basically managed to get a 15-acre field under co-ownership and sort of community custodianship. And then from that blank field, we built this, I guess, our whole farm. So agroforestry and the solar barn and the polytunnels and everything like that, because we started from that vision and then backcast and said, okay, yeah, we're never going to, develop the full farm vision that we want just from our income of, 200 grand from veg boxes, because we need to use that income for all the costs and things. So we backcast and said, okay, what does it take to truly set up the systems we need? Even just to set up the bare minimum, actually, of like the barn, the machinery, the cooler, everything like that. It was nearly 100 grand to do all of that. So that came with a whole campaign and strategy. And again, like relational approach. So we already had lots of strong relationships and grounding in that community. So we would literally, the way I see it, we were kind of, to put it bluntly, cashing in on what we'd already just like delivered so much benefit to like the community there. We'd like provide all these like really low cost veg boxes delivered by bike. We'd been constantly putting on free events for everyone. We'd be constantly serving everyone. We'd be constantly improving the biodiversity and the nature and the water quality and all these things. And then we were just asking for like a bit of support to continue that and to upscale it. And it was amazing that 555 people all supported that, but also very like common sense. I think they're all invested in their future, and we're a CIC. It's not going into anything for us. Like no one makes a individual dividend from this. It's all going back into like land and community. So it's kind of a really clear narrative, story, and messaging are really key for those crowdfunding things, or for any marketing campaign or whatever. The same would go. And the preparation, like 5 or 6 month build up at least to really, get all your beans in order, get the financial plans, get the communications thing. Maybe you get some help and some, graphic designers and things to help with that. But a lot can be done. We did it with, minimal. Um, we didn't know what we were doing. Basically, we just winged it. And yeah, so these are the sort of key 5 things I'd say for like crowdfunding, but also probably goes for things like marketing and general relational approach. Having that clear vision, so it's the head, heart, and hands. That really clear vision that is not like fear based. It's like going for the blue sky vision. It's not like holding back. Like if we just said, oh, we want to like slightly improve our irrigation system and maybe get a hoe and a better trailer, then I don't think we'd have 555 people from around the world be like, yeah, we want to support this. This is modeling the new food system. We might get a few local people chip in, and that's obviously also a good approach. But I think if you want to really do the financial backcasting and thriving approach, trusting in yourself and going for it. And we had no idea what we were doing, and we didn't necessarily know if we could implement all this, but we just went for it anyway, and then we implemented it imperfectly, but it's all there, and it's serving a lot of benefit. And yeah, so it's not holding back, but balancing that vision with the objectives, which is the head. So with that, like financial planning, with all those sort of things. I was lucky enough to start this with farm business partners and co-growers that had also these different skill sets and brought that different balance to the team. Um, so that's a key thing. Don't have to do it all yourself either. And implementation, the hands, so having the practicality of the vision is really important. So if you put on a crowdfunder, all these great ideas, and it's all come from the head and the heart, and it's like great, yeah, you got a lovely vision. And a lot of people could write that about how they want the food system to be or whatever. But if you haven't got a clear thing of like a track record of, or at least a clear plan or like research into like how that implementation actually happens, or like you haven't sort of done a few like pilot trials on a smaller scale or things, like that implementation piece is really key. So if you can really show how it's going to be implemented, and we even included our labor costs for the first 6 months, so we kind of made ourselves that available time for that labor to be paid through the crowdfunder for the first 6 months, so we really honed in on the how and the practical stuff. And then context and timing is really key. So like, I think we released our crowdfunder like around, it was just after like COP 20, whatever, 23, 24. I don't know. This was back in 2020. And we'd already secured the land. We'd already like done the business model. We'd already got the veg box scheme going. We were delivering them by bike around Bath and surrounding areas. So the context and timing of like around, there was this huge climate emergency, lockdown was just brewing. People were really focused on like local food systems. COP26 people were just like, oh, it's just like all talk, no action. Where's the action on the ground? And people were just realizing the importance of like climate, food systems, all these things. It was entering the mainstream a bit more. So the timing is really key, and like time of year, when you release it, when you put the posts out, all of those different things. And finally, the thing that underlies it is just the passion, energy, and purpose, which again comes from the balance of the head, the heart, and the hands, and having the right kind of people and mindsets and developing that and cultivating that. Which leads me on to tool 10, which is just a blank slide called mindsets, because I think that's what wraps all of this economic stuff together, and the kind of all the financials from the planning side to the visioning to the actual on the ground practice and the relational tools needed for that. Not that any of those will be perfect, but that those good designing and planning, and kind of taking a step back, but then also going into the detail and like doing the design and the thinking, the reflecting, but also like the rolling the sleeves up and just like leading by doing. All of that's from like the mindset on the ground, which is yeah, I'd say the fundamental tool of like economics stuff. Looking at economics in the broader sense. So regenerative mindset, developing that, cultivating that each day, not as like a perfectionist thing or like everyone's just like shifting that lens on it slightly each day by different actions and challenges and approaches to things. So yeah, really developing that mindset. over time and think about the different mindsets we've spoken about, like the sort of zooming in, zooming out, zooming in, thinking on the day to day, does this make economic sense? That's like just one of the key fundamental things. That is this task I'm doing, like, not that you need to like question it all and then like not do the task, but like just question it, be like, okay, actually, yeah, I'm doing this task quite regularly on a weekly basis. It's losing us money as this chunk of my hour of labor each week is losing us money, obviously. So is that okay? Is that covered by somewhere else? And actually, can it be, or is actually, do I need to like redesign the labor pattern for the week, or do redesign the system so that I'm harvesting more in one time and it's more efficient, or all these like different micro efficiencies, not to just be in the like just thinking about productivity because it's the head, the heart, and the hands, but when you think of that productivity from a very different perspective, like from a I sort of take a lot from like Japanese philosophy, like ikigai, when you're kind of like aligned with purpose, passions, and all these different things. When you're aligned in that, then the productivity comes from a very different flow. So it's not like the way I see it, people that try to be really efficient tend to like force it and aren't that efficient. And the people that seemingly it comes effortlessly from, it's because it comes from something beyond that, and that is something that's able to cultivate. Anyway, I'm rambling on about that a bit now. Kaizen, that was the word. Yeah, so that's like the workflow of like actually like when I'm harvesting the spinach, I want to be more efficient because it's like it's my craft. Just like I'm a potter is wanting to like shape that pot perfectly, or like do that woodwork thing like really well and efficiently, could or all these different things. So I'm seeing that harvesting that spinach and like filling that crate up really quickly because that's my craft. Um, and it brings me a lot of like that joy and purpose and fulfillment to like harvest that crate of spinach quickly. It's not because I'm getting shouted at by someone, or it's not because we've got all these economic pressures, although those are there, but it's actually from a different place, which is really key for me, at least in our context, and it might be different for others. So finally, before we wrap up and have a little time for questions, I think I'm just on time. I think a key thing which underlies all of this is like, what's your financial model as your like farm or business or growing operation, or even like multiple businesses within that farm? What's the key financial model? So a lot of people would be going along with it quite blindly, and I've been doing that in the past with the businesses. Like, I haven't actually decided. We've been in this murky middle ground of like, are we that type of business, or are we the social enterprise, or are we this like membership based thing, or the CSA, or charity, because we're doing all this, and then it's like really unclear. And it's okay to hold the complexity, but that can also be defined. So looking at like what the actual different financial models are and what's yours, I think would be a really key like reflection point for actually developing the economic models that you need. So it might be just a self-funded enterprise, or like a sole trader on one farm producing those crops, selling them. Really simple in a way, but that will have a different business plan, a different modeling and financial stuff and approach to all those things than like if it's like a very like community-based farm and you're providing all this community benefit, and you've got a more like mixed thing, or you might be like a membership scheme. For example, like Friends of Vallis is a really cool one. They've over in Frome, they've got like people pay a membership fee, and that covers some of the incomes for the roles needed for the farm and for the holistic aims of the farm, and all the well-being activities and everything else. So it's a very different model, to the different sort of enterprise models. Or is it like fully grant funded? Like there's some more like social farms or therapy farms, or ones that are just doing nature and rewilding and social engagement, and the food grains are kind of like on the side or something. Like those are maybe more like 80 or 90% grant funded, and that's okay because they're doing all those good things. They should be getting money channeled towards them rather than like all this money going to like phony carbon offsets or like whatever. Like there shouldn't be any shame about those approaches. Like it's a really good thing. But if that's the chosen financial model, then that's what you're going with, and that's where you put in your kind of the financial modeling, and that's how you make the decisions, and that's how you spread the various risks and opportunities. Or if it's a more like startup business phase, then looking at like investment options. Like I think a lot of farms are expected to just like econ buy without really having that actual real, like I think many farms are like 10 years in, they haven't given themselves like a startup phase where they actually have investment to get the systems they need to be viable for the next 10 years, is how what I've seen in practice at least. and the investment thing is constant, because if you want to keep, adjusting to the times, adjusting to the changing costs, changing input costs, then that adjustment to reach that level of investment required will shift over time. So don't think you're not beyond the startup just because it's in a different phase of the business. So yeah, as I said, our model is kind of this is yeah, kind of this like middle ground model, which we've tried to sort of refine and clarify over time and still in the process of, but really keeping the market garden, farm enterprise, and fields and stuff separate as like a self-funded resilient thing. And then we seek funding for wider ecosystem, community services, and things like that. In today's economic world, that seems to function enough for now. And yeah, so just to reinforce these key messages, I guess, which we started with at the start. Determine your financial and robust business model, and also if help is needed with that, that's fine, because farmers are stretched and you can't do everything. So don't see this as like yet another thing. Like this can be a thing that frees up capacity and frees up planning and avoids all those unknowns and things you have to hold in your head, and systems that could be more efficient can free up capacity. And number two, clarify the vision in collaboration and then backcast. Number three, ensuring the operational food production is as profitable as it can be. Yeah, again, I'm fully aware of this is in the context of like fruit and veg growing is so tricky in today's economic context, and we need to keep trying to change that system as well. But in the meantime, and on our farms, what can we do to actually make sure that operational thing is resilient? And there's tools to help with that as well. And it's a long-term game, it can take a bit of time to shift towards. Number four, if there's like a big gap in like startup investment needed, or like there's additional social ecological services you're providing, then look at the funding sources for that, and where's that coming from, and is it just like, are you just paying for it with your free labor, or is that coming, is that actually going to come through a proper channel to make sure you're properly resourced? And developing the financial tools, which we talked about, really basic ones that some farms do, but very many won't, with like actual costs accounting. Like if you can see our costs are like the amount of money that's gone out of a bank account, but that's not the same as knowing the true costs and the detail of that and things like that, which is really important. And I've definitely overlooked that in early years, and it's become really useful as a tool to help us be more resilient. Profit and loss, potentially some softwares or help or accounting, and just like trying to automate some of the boring shit and invoicing and stuff, which there's a level which is needed, but there's a level which can be quite more automated through different systems. And number six, develop the financial mindset. This kind of is the baseline for all of it, and make sure those decisions are actually informed at the micro levels, like the labor approach, your choice of crops, rather than the crop plan just being like, what do we want to grow? Oh yeah, I like cabbage. Or that it is, my opinion is that you've obviously got to keep the interest in the learning journey and that sort of motivation. But if you are stretched financially, like it'll be nice growing cabbage, but it'd be nice to grow it for 10 years rather than just for 1 year and then go out of business. So try and strike that balance, and that's up to you for that. Number seven, focus on relationships, collaboration, and communication underneath all of that. And going back to that head, heart, and hands, that is my summary for like economic success, is the balance of those three things.